Okay, well, first of all, good afternoon, everybody. It's fantastic to be joining you, and it was so impressive to see Mr. Saki taking us out into the actual fields to show how practical the work is. And also, it was perhaps brave or foolish for Japan to hold the Olympics, but it lifted the whole spirits of the world. And it was fantastic for me to watch the Olympics and to see how the world was watching, and everyone was so impressed with the way that it was so brilliantly organized. Now, I hope that my presentation is also going to be brilliant organized as well. What I'm going to do is take you through a story of working in schools. And my concern is that ESD people are trying to get it into schools rather than changing from within. So I've been working with the Center for Environmental Education in Ahmedabad, and also supported by Engagement Global, the German NGO, on the handprint care. And what we've been working on is the Chikamore, Tanemura, and Uno work on transformative model of ESD, TM-ESD. And we're looking at culturally embedded active learning work in schools. So in this presentation, what I hope to do is to show you some of the action learning pathways in school subject teaching that we're involved with using TM-ESD. So I'll start with some cultural history and heritage. We've been working with Chikamura Sensei now for many years with my colleagues Ken and Zuki on indigenous knowledge. And cultural history is really important for sustainable agriculture and lifestyle. And then we'll look at the Sustainable Development Goals, and we'll look at expanding the subject pedagogy. In other words, not doing something different, but building on what is already being done well in the schools. And then looking at heritage-led action learning. Some examples, I've chosen 3 examples which relate to local agriculture. And finally, in schools, we need to assess and how we can improve assessment in line with this expanded approach. So the first question that I try to answer for us here in South Africa is, how are histories and heritage foundations for learning? The second question is, how do the Sustainable Development Goals enable us to grasp complex concerns? The next, how can conventional subject teaching be expanded using TMS-ESD for ESD? How can heritage inform food security and community health innovation? And then, how can we best assess learning and competencies in our school activities? So welcome to Africa from Japan. This is a very old picture of Africa, and it illustrates how the colonials saw the African people as primitive and moving around all over the place, not as well-established agriculture. And also the Bokoni, where I live down here, are a culture that has completely disappeared. But that culture seems to have been involved in trade, not as far as Japan, but trade in the Indian Ocean. And they were very well established and have been in the area for many centuries, until just before the colonial intrusion, the Pedi conquered them, and that particular culture disappeared. This is what the landscape now looks at, taking a photograph from the sky. And you can see the ruins of this whole cultural civilization that was part of the Nguni cultures, the isiXhosa, Pedi, Sotho, Zulu, Swazi, Pondo, Hlubi, Tswana, and Indebele. Many of these cultures today we draw indigenous knowledge from. In this presentation, I'll be working with the Xhosa and the Zulu people. So if we look at the present now, having looked at the past in colonial modernity, then what we've got in our schools, and I heard this very disturbing picture from Japan as well, early onset diabetes amongst young children, obesity and heart disease, anemia, which is the iron deficiency, candida, which is the sugar bacteria in the gut, and of course, hunger, because there's not enough locally produced food anymore. So the disturbing statistic that I saw from Japan is now that the older generations will outlive their children. And I think we're dealing with this. We've seen it with the HIV/AIDS, where generations are being lost. So the health concerns for ESD and for local agricultural production are really high at the moment. And if you go into the family and local food production, this has decreased. So there's a serious food security risk. But you go to the supermarkets and you find that there's food there, there are cultured milks, and there are leafy vegetables. But these are expensive, the poor can't get them, and also they are producing the health risks. So if we look at the Sustainable Development Goals and the concern for health and for family and local food production, we can see that production and consumption has changed as the cities have grown. And in Southern Africa, there are massive inequalities. We're one of the most unequal societies in the world. And with this has come poverty, hunger, the questions of health and well-being, the need for education, and problems of gender. So the real question into the future for sustainability is, can we produce sufficient quality food? And it would seem that when we look at Mr. Saiki and his rejuvenation of the local food production in Japan, that this is the kind of thing that we also need here in South Africa. So looking at the action learning for a school subject pedagogy, good teachers teach their subject so that the students acquire the concepts and skills. Then they prepare tasks for the learners to learn the concepts and systems thinking in particular. And then they normally assess this. And in the work that has been done by Anna Svard in Israel, in mathematics, she describes how knowledge is acquired, but it's also developed through participation. And we need to balance acquiring knowledge and participation. In other words, the action learning. And here we've used the 5 T's of action learning from UNESCO to look again at the teacher's method of teaching and how can we expand this to include more participation of the learners in actually doing local things in meaningful ways to them. And using the TMESD approach, we take the matter of concern and then we say, well, we need to have subject knowledge. We need to find out more. We need to have the students working out solutions together, particularly in local areas. And we need them to try out and assess this so that there'll be a tuning in. There'll be children involved in much more practical work. There'll be talking, thinking together. There'll be rethinking and taking action. And all of this can be reviewed and reflected in just a small expansion of subject teaching. So Now, how do we deepen this? And this is the main point that I want to suggest to you, and that Chikimore and Tanimura and Uno, in their work, we look at working with the past, the present, to reimagine a sustainable future. So education can be expanded to include past stories, present experiences, and future possibilities. And here is the model that they work with, which here in South Africa, when we look at this, we said, oh, this looks quite complicated. But if you focus in on the student and the local matter of concern, then it's possible to look at cultural historical story sharing, so that what happens is the students are able to look at what is and what is not, so that they're able to begin to think about depth inquiry into how are things in our local area, in the world around us, and what could be done and what should be done to make changes so that we can design solutions and change challenges and assess these change challenges. Now, translating this into what can be in a very practical learning process in classrooms means we in the handprint care are looking at this as an action learning journey, where we take the 4 quadrants and we take the transformative model of ESD and we convert it into simple questions. How were things in the past? How are things today? What does this mean to us today? And how can we make things better together? So this is the way that we're working with the teachers on lesson study in a course-supported social learning process. And here is an example of fermented food, or amachewo. Using this model, what happens is the tuning in process goes back into history, and this is the history of the way that the amachewo used to be made and taken into the fields, and it would be the traditional energy food that people would use working in the fields. Then the students can look at how are things today, and we've got diabetes, obesity, and candida from the sugar diet, that the same products today have a lot of sugar in them, and they are available in the supermarkets. Many of the poor people can't get them, but people no longer are making this food for themselves. So the children can then look at, what does this mean to us today? And these are the experiments that we do with the children, looking at when they play soccer, like at the Olympics. Everyone wants Powerade, the energy drink. But the traditional energy drink was amachewo. And the children can ask, well, what is better for us, for our gut health, to buy or to make the amachewo? And in the children that we were working with down in the Makanda area, they just say, oh, it must be Energade. It must be the energy drink after the soccer game. But many of them said, yes, but maybe we shouldn't have it so much. Maybe we should have amachewo as well, using the traditional food, because it does the same job as the energy drink. And when you've tasted it, you can touch the past in your memories to feel the future flying on the wings of imagination. And this by Nina and Flope, the famous poet. She reminds us that transformative model of ESD is just a process of touching the past with our memories and feeling the future, including the children, and engaging in the imagination of transformative learning. So if we look at the next one, Amasi, the same approach, using a tuning in, these are the traditional ways that amasi used to be made. And of course, healthy digestive flora or healthy gut, healthy diet. And this is the amasi today in the shops. So the children can be involved in the classroom, making amasi, making yogurt, learning the lost skills. And then they can choose, do you have the sugar-enriched yogurt or amasi, or do you have homemade, or do you have both? And which is the better for us? The third example that touches the past with our memories to feel the future flying on the wings of imagination is the green. And this is closer to the example that we got from Mr. Saiki. And that is tuning in. Traditionally, people used to cook leafy vegetables, imifino, in iron pots. And of course, this led to iron coming into the body. But today we have iron deficiency, particularly in women, and very little locally produced food. So the questions that we can take is, in the supermarket, are these locally produced vegetables? Are they more expensive because they've come a long way? Do they have a big impact on climate change? And how many people are still picking wild vegetables that are in the local area? Or how many people are growing vegetables at home? And what can we do today? Should we buy vegetables? One of the things that came up in our research was that people are not picking the wild vegetables except going out at night or in the early morning, because picking wild vegetables and growing vegetables for yourself, local community members think that you are poor. So wild pick, shop bought or homegrown, or all of the above. And is it a good thing to be picking wild vegetables, even if you are rich and you don't get the stigma of being poor? So all of these approaches using TMESD are to touch the past with our memories and feel the future flying on the wings of imagination. And it's just an expansion of good teaching today. So the key thing is, a lot of people say, well, forget about assessment. And you can't do that as a teacher. I'm a teacher, and I need children to be acquiring knowledge and finding out things. I need them to participate in my lesson and to be engaged in working things out. So this particular approach of teaching a subject with a startup story and heritage around local concerns really just makes for good teaching. It's nothing special, but it is a necessary innovation in the curriculum that we need to make. So the students are actively involved in raising questions, finding out more through depth inquiry and systems thinking, and working things out together so that they can apply and try out more sustainable and just alternatives. But reflecting, how are we going to do this with conventional formal assessment? Well, the education department here in South Africa, using our CAPS curriculum, says, well, we must test, can the children learn and answer questions? Can they know and remember things? Can they understand and apply? Can they analyze, evaluate, and innovate? And here we give them tests and exams around keywords and concepts. We give them practical tasks and translation tasks. But the key thing that we're learning for ESD using the transformative model of ESD is that these are all connected. But for ESD, analysis, evaluation, and innovation comes in. And this really does challenge and improve education and the qualities that we're looking for in education. Then also the United Nations, UNESCO, they are saying that we need to include competencies like systems thinking, anticipation, normative, strategic, collaboration, critical thinking, and self-awareness and problem solving. But we have found difficulty with this. And cultural and personal competences develop with heritage and life experience. And we don't include enough heritage and life experience in our classrooms, as the knowledge, disposition, and aesthetics enable us to know things in relation to a context. And here what can be known and understood together is not only what's in the books, but what is also in the experience of the culture and in the local area, and developing therefore a know-how to be able to resolve concerns, to be able to understand and apply concepts, critically evaluate concerns, and deliberate better ways of doing things together. And then we've combined these so that we're working with systems thinking, critical thinking, and problem solving in the startup quadrants at the beginning of a program. And then as the students become more involved, then they start building skills and being able to develop more sustainable ways of doing things together so that they can try out, assess sustainable ways of being. And in this second part, reflexive modes of action, in other words, children being able to learn to anticipate practically, to be looking at what is normal and new normal, looking at strategic capabilities, being able to work together or collaborate, and having self-awareness. So knowing has been very important in schooling, but if we're going to have impact of local food production and healthy foods, we need a new know-how, an expanded know-how that's built on the heritage in the local areas and food production in the local areas, so that the students are able to take up and be part of change that is really positive in an area, and they see the link between schooling and the sustainability of their homes and families. So lastly, there is this work that's been done by Professor Shumba Kalab-Mandikonza and my colleague, Hala Sasitka, on assessment of significant learning. And they work on developing assessment strategies for foundational learning. Can the learner identify, critique, understand, and describe matters of concern using systems thinking and in-depth understanding? Now application of this knowledge is really important as well. Can the learner analyze, interpret, apply knowledge, the higher order skills to solve problems in relation to sustainable development matters of concern in a particular context, like health matters of sustainability, food production matters of sustainability, and then integration. Can the learner describe, analyze, synthesize, and align different types of knowledges, values, skills in order to contribute to problem solving and change processes? Can they include the human and ecological dimensions? Is the learner able to show care and concern for others and surroundings? A lot of the knowledge at school isn't linked to this, but it can be through using the transformative approach to ESD. Caring and Ubuntu, the ethics. Can the learner reflect on a situation and show empathy and compassion for self, community, and other life forms? And finally, learning how to learn. Do we really want children just learning how to learn from books? Do they need to learn from each other? Do they need to learn by doing things that are linked to the local area and to their heritage? So is the learner able to critique, evaluate, review, formulate, and generate new ideas and suggestions for change? And I think that what I saw before my presentation was a wonderful example of a local area which would be a rich learning environment for children. And the transformative model of ESD work that has been done with critical realism in Japan has been very useful for us to think more deeply and to begin work with teachers. So out of this presentation, I've prepared 11 WhatsApp videos for teachers to use. And I can share these with you because they go over exactly the same ground, and they show you how we are beginning to work to build education, to expand education, and to deepen education with the transformative model of ESD in the work that we're doing on handprint care. So thank you for the invitation. It's been a real pleasure to work with the team, and I have been challenged and enjoyed putting together this work and sharing it with you.